I'm pleased once again to be speaking to a gentleman who is an author, historian in music, who writes excellent books and about some amazing artists and amazing bands. Good afternoon, Peter Chexfield.
Good afternoon, Chris. Thanks for having me back as always.
Well, Peter, you've written some books about people like the Searchers, Herman Hermits, UK's 60s pop, Beatles, Rolling Stones. I could go on and on. Now you have written a book, your latest book, Cliff Richard, The Shadow Years.
Yeah, I think I've been playing with the idea of it for a long while. He's underappreciated. I mean, I counted yesterday. He's had 136 hits. You can't call someone sort of underappreciated in all ways. But their influence, on the Beatles and all that. They were the first British act to rival Elvis Presley. They had the traditional beat group, 2 guitars, bass and drums. They appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show, made the zany movies. So they really laid the groundwork for so many who followed.
And this is a really detailed book about those years from 1958 to 1968. How did you research this, and where did you get so many of those excellent photos?
I've got quite a big collection, actually, of Cliff Richard and the Shadows, mostly CDs, but a few old singles and things. So some are from my collection, various websites, book, old press cuttings, Some things I sort of half remember throughout the years. I'm forever making notes. I go back to old files and things. So.
And Cliff Richard, he was not born Cliff Richard. What was his real name, and what type of upbringing did he have?
Harry Webb, and he was born in India actually on 14th of October 1940. Not so much privileged, but more or less middle class, I'd say, upbringing, yeah. But like so many, first of all, he heard Lonnie Donegan, but then Elvis Presley, and even Elvis Presley at the age of 16, he changed his life. Yeah.
Cliff bursted on the music scene in 1958. He's back in band with the Drifters. What was his first recording?
His first recording was Move It. Well, actually, the B-side, Schoolboy Crush, which wasn't particularly good. It was a cover of an American artist named Bobby Helms. The producer, Norrie Paramore, wanted that to be the A-side, but he played it to his daughter, and his daughter raved over Move It, and other people who heard it, and they quite wisely flipped, and it was the first really great rock and roll record. I mean, there was others, Tommy Steele and whatever did. I don't want to pull him down, a great entertainer, but this was the first real British-made rock and roll record.
And why did Cliff change his backing group from the Drifters to the Shadows, and where did they all meet each other?
Some, I believe, like at school clubs or whatever, the original line-up, the Drifters, but then they drifted away. I had to put that in. and then, he used to sing at the Two Eyes coffee lounge in the West End. And the things that really changed it, a couple of guys came down from Newcastle, and that was Hank Marvin and Bruce Welch. And, they were thrilled with them, got them to join, and then Tony Meehan, the drummer, and Jet Harris, the bass player, and that was a classic lineup of the Drifters.
And when did Cliff actually have his first number one?
His first number one, it was, I believe, his fifth single in 1959. Move It got to number 2, so his first record very nearly. But his fifth single, Living Doll, and that was the thing that put him into the almost superstar bracket.
Mm. And what influence and impact on groups of the early 60s?
I think enormous, particularly Hank Marvin. I mean, people like Brian May today, and Ritchie Blackmore, and the late Jeff Beck, and George Harrison, and I mean, I was reading Keith Richards' biography a while back, Life it's called, and I didn't associate Cliff Richard with Keith Richards, apart from a similar note. But he said one of his early favourites was Travelling Light, which was a big Cliff Richard hit. Yeah, and he loved that record, and mostly for Hank's guitar. So.
And I think it was that thing, I know I did, that my parents played Cliff Richard's music, so you grew up with it. And funny you say Travelling Light, that was one of my favourite songs when I was a youngster.
Well, I was born in January 1963, and number one at the time was Bachelor Boy by Cliff Richard. So, it was literally there from the beginning of my life. Yes.
And Cliff and the Shadows went to America. How did they go down?
Reasonably well. Living Doll, it was a fairly big hit there. I believe number 20 or 20-something. And yeah, he was fairly low down on the bill. I mean, he didn't take the country by storm or anything, but eventually he did 3 Ed Sullivan appearances prior to the Beatles even. You know, people tend to forget that. I think they made a mistake, because initially I don't think he offered quite enough different from the other, like Ricky Nelson and all the other entertainers there. But I think eventually, once the Beatles broke, they should have pushed Cliff Richard and the Shadows more over there, and you know, especially their more beaty numbers. And I think they could have become a much bigger success than they were.
Did Cliff and the Shadows write their own material?
Cliff did a little bit, the odd lyrics here and there, but a lot of records were written by Hank Marvin and Bruce Welch or together. And the original guitarist, Ian Samwell, who wrote Move It, once he left, he continued writing songs for them as well. So with those 3 and the odd other writers here and there, yeah, they did the occasional covers, but a lot of it, you know, prior to the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and everything, their own songs.
Why did Cliff decide to go solo, and was it an amicable split with the Shadows?
It was a very gradual thing. I mean, by his second album called Cliff Sings in 1959, about half the tracks were with the Shadows and half were with a Norrie Paramore Orchestra, you know, ballads. So there was always a bit of everything. But then by 1968, which his book comes up, the Shadows themselves were falling apart, really, and I just think that they'd reached the end of the line, and you know, of the collaboration. They worked better on their own, but there was no big fallout, and there's been loads of well, certainly 4 or 5 big reunions since.
And Cliff Richard also did some movies, including Summer Holiday. Do you think he had this ambition of being an actor as well as a singer?
I wonder how much actually it was inspired by the Elvis movies, you know, because Elvis was his idol, and to an extent perhaps. Later on in 1968, he did a really good movie that very few people have seen called Two a Penny. He wrote the title track as well, and it's got a vaguely religious theme. But he plays a dramatic role, you know. He's not a particularly nice person to his girlfriend and all that, and then he stumbles on a Billy Graham lecture and starts thinking, you know, sort of thing. But in that, he's very convincing, you know, as a bad guy. So I think he had potential, really.
And in 1968, Cliff represented the UK in the Eurovision Song Contest with Congratulations, which is still a very popular song today.
Yeah, a lot of people forget he didn't actually win. He got to number 2. And the same 5 years later, Power to All My Friends, all our friends. And the Shadows themselves, they did Let Me Be the One in 1975 Eurovision, yes. But none of them won, but they're still timeless records.
Well, Peter, this is a really interesting book. It's a must for Cliff Richard fans. Where can our listeners purchase Cliff Richard and the Shadow Years?
From Amazon, the largest bookshop in the world. But if they can't find that, just Google my name, Peter Chexfield, and you'll find my website, and email me. Yeah, I'm sure we can come up with something, or I could find it for you if you're not on Amazon. So.
Well, Peter, thank you for another fantastic book, and thank you for speaking to us today.
Thank you as always, Chris.
Well, that concludes the Light Lunch for this Monday. Light Lunch is back